Something unimaginable has happened inside Buckingham Palace. In a shocking turn of events, the royal family has confirmed a heartbreaking development that has left the world in disbelief. The announcement came without warning, shaking Britain to its core and sending ripples of grief across the globe. For generations, the palace has stood as a symbol of strength and continuity, but tonight, that image has been shattered. The question on everyone's mind is simple: what truly happened behind those royal gates? Stay tuned as we uncover the full story behind this tragic day that has changed the monarchy forever. Before we begin, subscribe and share your thoughts below. This is a moment the world will never forget. The unthinkable morning. It began quietly, the kind of morning that gave no hint of the storm that was about to break. The sun rose over Buckingham Palace, painting the courtyard in soft gold as staff went about their routines. But something was different. The rhythm of the palace, usually calm and precise, felt off. Phones rang earlier than usual, meetings vanished from schedules, and senior aides moved briskly through the corridors, their faces tense. A strange stillness filled the air, broken only by hurried footsteps and hushed exchanges that trailed off whenever someone passed by. By mid-morning, unease had settled like a fog. Staff, who normally greeted each other with polite smiles, avoided eye contact. Messages were no longer sent by email, but delivered in person. The communications team, normally visible and relaxed, vanished behind closed doors. Outside, reporters stationed near the gates began to notice unusual activity. Security vehicles arrived in clusters. Staff entered through rarely used side entrances. Guards shifted positions without explanation. Something had happened inside those walls, something serious enough to disturb the palace's unshakable order. By noon, whispers reached the press. Journalists spoke carefully, relying only on fragments of information. One called it a significant development. Another described it as deeply troubling. Within an hour, speculation spiraled into chaos. Social media flooded with rumors, each more dramatic than the last. For the first time in years, even veteran royal correspondents admitted they didn't know what was happening. Then, without warning, the royal website went offline. When it returned moments later, the truth appeared. The statement was simple: black text on a white background, framed by the royal crest. It was brief, but it carried the weight of history. A deeply distressing and heartbreaking development has occurred within the royal family. It expressed sorrow, thanked the public for their concern, and asked for privacy as the family faced an unimaginable moment. There were no details, no explanations, just the quiet acknowledgement of tragedy. The effect was instant. Television anchors broke into live programming. Phones buzzed across the country. In offices and schools, people stopped what they were doing to read the words themselves. Crowds began to gather at the palace gates, their faces pale and silent. Reporters stood in the drizzle, speaking in hushed tones as cameras captured the growing sea of mourners. The guards remained at their posts, their stillness now resembling grief more than discipline. Inside, the silence was suffocating. Staff who had served for decades said they had never seen the palace so still. Some were quietly dismissed from certain areas, while others were told to remain in place until further notice. The corridors that once echoed with conversation now felt endless, lined with unanswered questions and faces marked by disbelief. By evening, the news had spread far beyond Britain. From Washington to Sydney, headlines echoed the same haunting phrase: tragedy in the palace. The world waited for more, but the palace offered nothing beyond that first statement. Behind its grand walls, history itself seemed to falter. The unthinkable had happened, and the heart of the monarchy would never beat the same again. A message wrapped in mourning. When the announcement appeared on the royal website, the world seemed to hold its breath. There was no warning, no preparation, just the sudden appearance of the royal crest and a few lines that would alter the course of the day. The statement was brief but devastating, carrying the weight of grief in every word. It spoke of an event that had deeply shaken the family and left the nation in mourning. The tone was unlike anything the palace had ever released. It was not formal or distant, but trembling, human, and raw. Within minutes, television programs were interrupted across Britain. Anchors spoke with solemn voices, their expressions pale and uncertain. The message was read aloud on every network, filling homes and offices with disbelief. The words were calm yet heavy, crafted carefully but unable to mask the sorrow behind them. The royal household, long seen as a fortress of composure, sounded fragile. In those few sentences, the monarchy revealed not only tragedy but emotion, and the people could feel it. Outside Buckingham Palace, the first signs of mourning began to take shape. People arrived in silence, drawn by something deeper than curiosity. Some carried bouquets wrapped in paper. Others brought photos of happier royal days, and many came empty-handed, unsure what to do except stand near the place that now felt at the center of national grief. The air was cold and still, filled with quiet sobs and the soft hum of reporters speaking live to the world. Across the country, daily life paused. In shops, transactions stopped mid-sentence. In schools, teachers struggled to explain what had happened to wide-eyed children. In small towns, people stood outside their doors just to hear the sound of the church bells as they began to toll in unison. The sound carried across fields and city streets alike, a haunting reminder of shared sorrow. Britain had mourned before, but this felt different: immediate, collective, deeply personal. Social media turned into a flood of emotion. Hashtags bearing the names of the royals trended worldwide. Photos of Prince William and his family filled the timelines, accompanied by words of prayer and disbelief. Celebrities, politicians, and citizens alike added their voices to a growing chorus of compassion. Every corner of the globe seemed to echo the same sentiment: heartbreak, unity, and grief. As the day darkened, the crowd outside the palace grew. Candles flickered in the wind, flowers covered the pavement, and messages written by hand were pinned to the gates. A mother held her daughter's hand as they placed a single rose beside hundreds of others. Elderly couples stood silently, tears streaming down faces that had watched this family for generations. The palace lights glowed behind the iron gates, their reflections dancing on the wet stone below. The announcement had not revealed details, only emotion. Yet that was enough to shake a nation. For a country so used to royal stoicism, this moment was unlike any other. The fortress had shown its heart, and for the first time in living memory, the monarchy and its people grieved together, united not by tradition, but by shared sorrow beneath the storm that now raged beyond the palace gates. The storm beyond the gates. The reaction was instant, rising like a wave before anyone could brace for it. Within minutes of the announcement, people began to gather outside Buckingham Palace. They came quietly at first, uncertain of what to do, but drawn by an unspoken pull, a shared instinct to be near the heart of the tragedy. Some carried flowers still wrapped in paper. Others brought photographs of the royal family, and many arrived empty-handed, their faces pale with disbelief. The sound of quiet sobs mixed with the low murmur of voices, the click of cameras, and the shuffle of feet on the rain-soaked pavement. Across Britain, time seemed to slow. In small towns and great cities alike, televisions flickered in living rooms and radios whispered the same devastating words. In classrooms, teachers stopped lessons and tried to explain what had happened. In shops and offices, strangers exchanged glances and asked softly, "Have you heard?" The nation seemed suspended between shock and sorrow, unable to fully grasp the scale of what had been lost. By the afternoon, the sound of bells filled the air. From cathedrals in London to tiny chapels in rural villages, their solemn toll rolled across fields and through city streets. The ringing was not ordered by decree, but born of instinct, an act of shared mourning that transcended ceremony. People stepped out of their homes to listen, standing still as the notes carried on the wind. Each echo was a reminder that grief respected no boundaries, that pain could unite even the most distant hearts. Online, the world reacted in kind. Social media became a flood of emotion, images of the palace gates, of the royal crest, of the family at the center of heartbreak. Hashtags with their names trended globally within minutes. Messages of condolence poured in from every continent. Some offered prayers, others posted photographs from happier times, and countless more simply wrote that they could not believe it. Public figures and world leaders joined ordinary citizens in a collective voice of sorrow that seemed to span the planet. Outside the palace, the crowd grew into thousands. The cold wind carried the scent of flowers and candle wax. A little girl placed a single rose at the gate, her mother's tears falling silently beside her. Elderly couples held hands and gazed up at the palace windows as though waiting for reassurance that would never come. Police officers moved carefully through the crowd, guiding those who came to leave tributes. There was no noise of protest, no anger, only the quiet ache of a shared loss. As evening fell, the palace stood illuminated behind the iron gates, its golden lights glowing against the darkening sky. Reporters spoke softly, their voices barely above a whisper, unsure how to describe what everyone already felt. The monarchy had always been seen as unshakable, a symbol of endurance and composure. Yet on this day, its walls seemed fragile, its grandeur softened by grief. The silence, the tears, and the flicker of candles told the truth more clearly than any statement. The storm beyond the gates had come, and it was made of heartbreak, not fury. Inside, the family's despair. Behind the towering gates of Buckingham Palace, beyond the glittering facade that had always represented order and endurance, there was only silence. The royal family, so accustomed to composure and protocol, had been reduced to grief. Those within the palace described an atmosphere so heavy it felt almost physical, as though sorrow itself had taken shape and lingered in every corridor. Advisors walked quietly, their voices hushed to whispers. Long-serving staff members who had seen the family through triumphs and crises were brought to tears in private corners. Even the guards, trained to stand expressionless, seemed weighed down by mourning. In the early hours, an emergency meeting took place in one of the palace's private chambers. Senior royals gathered beneath the cold shimmer of chandeliers, their faces drawn and pale. Advisors outlined what little could be done, but there were no solutions that could ease the pain. The king sat at the head of the table, motionless. For much of the meeting, he said nothing, his gaze fixed downward as though words had abandoned him. He had spent a lifetime mastering control, learning that a monarch must never waver. But on this day, that restraint was gone. He was not a king before his family, but a father broken by grief. Those who were there described the moment as unbearable. Queen Camilla sat beside him, her hand resting gently on his arm. The room remained silent even after the discussion ended, no one moving, no one daring to breathe too loudly. When the meeting finally dissolved, the family members drifted away, their footsteps echoing through the long marble halls. Duty, which had always been their anchor, offered no comfort now. What they faced was not a matter of state, but the raw truth of loss, something no crown could shield them from. Elsewhere in the palace, Prince William and Princess Kate moved quietly through the day. William, raised within these same walls, was said to be shattered but focused on his children, trying to protect them from the weight pressing upon their home. Kate, steadfast as ever, held the family together in quiet strength. They were seen briefly at a window overlooking the courtyard, their silhouettes framed by the fading afternoon light, both staring into the distance with expressions of exhaustion and disbelief. Messages of condolence poured in from across the world. Heads of state, celebrities, and ordinary citizens sent words of love and sympathy. Yet within the palace, time felt frozen. The sound of footsteps had faded. Meals went untouched, and even the ticking of clocks seemed louder than usual. Staff who had served through decades of history whispered that they had never witnessed such stillness, such heartbreak. As night fell over London, the palace lights dimmed one by one. The king remained in solitude, declining briefings and visitors alike. Buckingham Palace, long seen as a symbol of strength and endurance, had become something far more human, a house in mourning. Behind its walls, the family that carried a nation's hopes could do nothing but grieve, not as royals bound by duty, but as a father, a mother, and children mourning a loss too deep for words. The prince's breaking point. For Prince William, the tragedy that shook the palace was not just a test of duty, but the breaking point of a burden he had carried for far too long. Those closest to him had noticed the signs in the weeks before the announcement. His public appearances had grown fewer, his smiles more strained, his voice quieter when speaking at engagements. He had continued to show up, to shake hands, to lead, because that is what was expected of him. But behind the calm surface, something inside him had begun to fracture. The weight of expectation, the pressure of leadership, and the pain of personal loss had finally become too heavy to bear. When the news broke, William reportedly spent hours alone in his study at Adelaide Cottage, away from the cameras and advisors. His phone rang constantly, messages from dignitaries and family members arriving one after another. Yet for a time, he answered none of them. He sat in silence, staring out over the gardens where his children often played, trying to process the reality that had so suddenly descended upon his life. For a man who had spent his entire adulthood balancing the roles of father, husband, and future king, the moment was both surreal and unbearable. Those who know him well say that William has always carried his emotions quietly. He learned from an early age that the public watches not only what the royals say, but how they appear. Composure had become part of his armor, a shield built over decades of scrutiny. Yet this time, the armor cracked. When he appeared before the cameras later that day, his eyes were red, his expression pale. There was no rehearsed smile, no polished tone. The nation saw not the heir to the throne, but a man standing on the edge of grief. Princess Kate stood beside him, steady and graceful, her hand occasionally brushing his as if to lend him strength. Her presence seemed to anchor him, reminding him that even in despair, they were not alone. Together they faced the cameras, their voices trembling as they spoke. William thanked the public for their kindness and compassion, his words deliberate but heavy with emotion. He paused several times, his gaze lowering as though the effort to continue was almost too much. When he asked for space for his family to grieve, it was not the formal request of a royal figure, but the plea of a husband and father trying to protect those he loved most. After the brief appearance, they returned to their home in Windsor, where the world's eyes could no longer reach them. The palace released a short note saying that the couple would step back temporarily from public duties. Behind closed doors, William was said to have spent the evening with his children, keeping the routine normal to shield them from the storm outside. Yet even within that effort, the ache remained visible. The boy who once walked behind his mother's coffin now faced another heartbreak, this time as a man carrying both a crown and the unbearable weight of loss. In that moment, the world saw not a future king, but a human being brought to his breaking point, holding his family close and finding strength in the only place left to look: love. Days turned into nights, and still the palace remained silent. The Union Jack continued to hang at half-mast, unmoving even in the wind, as if the nation itself had paused. Outside the gates, the sea of flowers grew higher, spilling across the pavement in a mosaic of color and sorrow. Photographs of the royal family, some faded and others freshly printed, were tucked among the bouquets. Candles flickered despite the drizzle, their wax pooling over the stone. Each one seemed to whisper a prayer, not only for what had been lost, but for what lay ahead. Britain was mourning, but it was also waiting for a sign, a word, a glimpse of what the future would bring. Inside Buckingham Palace, time moved differently. The vast halls, usually alive with movement and ceremony, had fallen into near silence. Footsteps echoed where laughter once lingered. The king remained mostly out of sight, appearing briefly for meetings before retreating to his private quarters. Prince William and Princess Kate had withdrawn entirely, spending time with their children away from the public eye. For the first time in generations, the monarchy had vanished from view, hidden behind its own walls of grief. The public began to ask the question that no one wanted to say aloud: what happens now? Newspapers tried to answer, printing headlines filled with speculation about the future of the crown. Political commentators debated the stability of the institution, while royal experts spoke cautiously about transition, about the uncertain path that lay ahead. For a monarchy that had always represented permanence, the uncertainty felt foreign, even frightening. Yet beneath the questions, a quiet understanding began to grow. The tragedy had changed everything. The monarchy, long regarded as the steadfast heart of the nation, had revealed something it had spent centuries guarding: its humanity. The pain etched across the faces of the royal family had stripped away the illusion of untouchable grandeur. For once, the crown did not seem eternal or distant. It seemed fragile, real, and profoundly human. It was a moment of reckoning for an institution built on tradition. Could a monarchy that showed emotion still command the reverence of its people? Or was this the beginning of a new kind of legacy, one not built on ceremony, but on connection? Across the country, conversations shifted from grief to reflection. In homes and cafes, people spoke softly about the future. Some believed that the tragedy had made the royals more relatable, while others feared that the pain might forever alter the balance between duty and family. The uncertainty hung in the air like mist, touching everyone who had followed the story with heavy hearts. As night fell over London, the lights of the palace glowed faintly through the fog. The sound of footsteps faded, leaving only the murmur of the crowd beyond the gates. In that stillness, a truth settled over the nation. Crowns may symbolize power, but beneath them beat hearts that can break like anyone else's. And though the road ahead was uncertain, one thing was clear: the future of the monarchy would be shaped not by tradition alone, but by the humanity it had finally allowed the world to see. Conclusion. The palace stands silent tonight, its lights dim against the London sky. Yet the echoes of this tragedy continue to stir hearts across the world. The story of the royal family has always been one of duty and endurance, but this moment has revealed something far deeper: the fragile humanity beneath the crown. As Britain looks to the future, one question remains: can love and unity rebuild what loss has broken? The world will be watching, and so will history. If this story moved you, share your thoughts below and subscribe for more untold truths behind the monarchy. Because in times like these, even the mightiest families remind us no one is beyond the reach of heartbreak.